Sisters, don't be shy. Put your video on so we can see you. Keep Caroline
we do
and I
have to say that
Yeah,
we are now recording the call. So if you don't want to be on the recorded call, keep your video off.
Oh, yes, that's
So
true.
we'd love to see your faces and we'd love to have you on our video call.
We're recording you really so we can just remember what we talk about.
I can't start my video. This is Monica, if you can't see me. I've had this before, although
I can see you. We can see you now, Monica. You've appeared.
Great, this just happened. Yeah. All right. I've been plugging away for half a minute, but it suddenly happened. So hello.
So I can see Sarah, Margaret, Pamela, Beverly, Callie, maybe? Callie Mutley?
Oh, is that me you're talking about?
I'm trying to figure out what your name is.
My name's Angie.
Ah, well, you're doing a very good job of disguising yourself.
Oh yeah, I can see it. Mutley Callie.
That's my email address.
And I can see another Pamela. My Pamelas are both one on top of the other. Monica, and then I can see a bit of June or a forehead of June.
Thank you.
Oh, hello. And then another Margaret. You can never have too many Margarets. My mother is a Margaret. So with a no bias intended, the Margarets are very welcome. Then we've got an iPad Linda.
Me, yeah. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Another one with an email address.
Eileen, Lynn, Katie, Vivian, Anne, Vicky, and Emma. Brilliant. Well, you're all very welcome. And if any of you are Irish, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
And if you're not, I hope, those who like a drink, I hope you've had a nice Guinness anyway. So
I've also been invited to the pub.
Very good.
But no, I'm not.
So Nadia is on her way. Her commitment to public transport is admirable, but the public transport service is a little bit less so. So she's been on a series of trains which have all been delayed, but she should be with us very, very shortly. I'm imagining that many of you know one another.
No.
Well,
not me.
I don't know anybody.
Neither do I.
No.
Called her for long.
So those of you who haven't yet met anyone, so was that June?
It was, yeah.
Where are you phoning in from, June?
Middlesbrough.
Excellent.
Oh.
Well, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Have we got anyone else from the northeast?
Well,
I know we've got some Yorkshire because I can
I'm
see
from Yorkshire.
Sarah.
We were
Richmond in
originally,
Yorkshire.
we are a part of Yorkshire, by the way, Middlesbrough. Even though we're Cleveland, it is North Yorkshire.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
true. Excellent. Well, we've got Sarah and Vicky who are also from Yorkshire. We've got any more Yorkshire folk?
Yes. Beverly.
Where are you? And where are you, Beverly?
I'm in Richmond in North Yorkshire.
Oh, very nice.
Mm.
That's like the little bit of Surrey that sort of got lost.
That's the Chancellor's constituency, I'm afraid.
Hopefully not for long.
My father was from Yorkshire, if that counts.
That definitely counts.
Puts me on the side of the angels.
Pamela, where are you from? Pamela Richards. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh. Hello, sorry. I'm with.
Hey, Pam.
Hiya, June.
I know somebody now.
You do know people. You know them all by the time you go in an hour. Pamela, where are you?
I'm from Middlesbrough too, same as June on the Unison.
Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I know we've also got Abby from Manchester, who recently got elected to the LCR executive. So that's very exciting. Welcome, Abby. Have we got anyone from further south? Emma, where are you from? Oh,
Can I
Nadia's
interrupt?
arrived.
I was just going to let you know that Nadia's arrived.
Yeah, I'd spotted her at the corner of my eye.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Where are you from, Emma?
Eastbourne.
Oh, blimey.
Very south.
So
Anyone
about
else?
south as you can get, yeah.
Well, Caroline's a neighbour-ish. Caroline's in Gosport.
A little bit further across.
A little bit
Sorry.
further.
Demonstrating my Yorkshire ignorance of geography. Well, wherever you're from, you're really, really welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thanks, obviously, to Nadia, one of our finest MPs, and Caroline Osborne, who's up there in the left-hand corner on my screen, who's running the trade union work for Labour for New Democracy. So we just thought we'd have a bit of a chat about where the campaign is, talk to Nadia and Caroline about why they're supporting it. Maybe, do people want to mute whilst they're not talking? Then you can kind of, boil the kettle and do whatever else you'd like to do. Before we talk about PR, we're here because we want to extend democracy, and I just think it would be remiss for us not to very briefly at least recognise the horrendous things that are going on in those parts of the world where there is little democracy to defend. We've seen some absolutely incredible bravery from women in Ukraine, also women peace campaigners in Belarus and in Russia in recent days. And I just think, we maybe take a moment to just think about what's going on over there. And I just thought maybe Nadia, you'd like to say a couple of words, and then we'll talk about the luxury that we have of defending our electoral system. But Nadia, do you want to maybe just say something quickly?
Thanks, Laura. I think it's really important to start with that, and thank you for doing that. I don't have an awful lot to add to what you've said. I think you've put it really beautifully. But I think as socialists, as Democrats, we need to stand in total unequivocal solidarity with the people of Ukraine in their right to self-determination, to peace and safety, as we should with people around the world. And we should also stand in solidarity with people in Russia who are bravely resisting Putin's regime. And our government should be doing so much more to support them. It should be waiving all visa restrictions for Ukrainian refugees, for Russian refugees, Belarusians, but also for people across the world who are fleeing war, persecution, or people who simply just want to move. So I think it's particularly important that we have in our minds women who are at the forefront of this. Some of them will be fighting on the front line, some of them will be relatives of those who are, or will be kind of doing their own resistance in their communities, in their workplaces, and also other marginalised groups like the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community, like LGBTQ people who will be particularly at risk of persecution.
That's great. Thank you, Nadia. And solidarity to any of you who are sort of particularly directly affected by what's going on. And I think all of us are just at some level feeling it. Now, in a way, of course, we're a million miles away, clearly, and luckily for us, from Ukraine. But I think we do know we've got a battle on in the UK to defend democracy. And so I thought we might just start a little bit, perhaps Nadia and then Caroline, by putting, what we're doing to try to get PR into the wider context, and just thinking for a couple of minutes about, what the government has been doing in terms of the elections bill, other pieces of legislation, because I think, PR it shouldn't be a democratic island. It's part of a wider push for democracy. So again, Nadia, do you want to just say a couple of words about that?
Yeah, sure. I think this is an important place to start, because we've seen in recent months and years, particularly after the 2019 election, this creep of increasingly authoritarian and draconian legislation, whether it's the elections bill, the policing bill, the nationality and borders bill. There are so many, and we've seen over the years and very recently lots of threats to our democracy, whether that's to parliamentary sovereignty, the independence of the judiciary, the individual right to have a trial by jury. And I think the electoral system is obviously a big factor in that. The Tories have a huge majority, and when one party has an 80-seat majority or thereabouts, they can pretty much do whatever they like, and we've seen that play out. And of course, the Tories may not have won in such a big way if it had been a proportional system, But I think it's also important to consider that there are other factors at play here, that our democratic rights and working class institutions have been under attack over the last few decades. So our ability as people to resist this authoritarian legislation has been curtailed. So, for example, trade unions have been obliterated since Thatcher, and membership is extremely low, particularly in certain sectors like care work, which is disproportionately staffed by women workers. The right to protest is already very restricted, even before the policing bill. And of course, we live in a country and in a society where the media is pretty dominated by the right wing. So I think, as well as considering today why proportional representation is so important, we also need to consider kind of wider democratic reform beyond elections, and how people can have a much deeper sense of democracy and power in their workplaces, in their communities, in their lives every day, not just once every 5 years.
Yeah, no, you mentioned in there, so I want to bring Caroline in, the issue of, of trade unions. So Caroline, this is the thing that you've really been focusing on in the campaign, and you've done an absolutely brilliant job, which is one of the reasons why we are moving Unite, which is really, really important to us winning PR. Do you want to just talk a little bit about, for you, the connection between trade union and workers' rights and PR, and why that's such a big motivation for you to be part of this campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, Nadia sort of touched on the trade union restrictions. I mean, we have some of the most restrictive trade union laws in the well, OECD nations, certainly. I hate the term developed world, because I think sometimes overdeveloped would be more appropriate. But yeah, I mean, we have really heavy restrictions, and it's even on little things that sound, well, they sound like little things, but they're not. So, for example, the way that trade unions ballot, the fact that it has to be a postal ballot, that they don't allow electronic ballots. I mean, that is absolutely, I mean, it sounds like if you put that to, you know, your average person on the street, they go, well, that's not a big deal, you know, like, but actually it's a huge deal, because getting people to vote on a paper ballot and getting them to get that vote back in time means that actually strikes can rarely ever happen. And it takes the teeth out the trade unions. And so you have this situation where trade union bargaining power is greatly reduced by something that seems small and insignificant. And that is what the Tories are very good at. They're very good at putting through legislation that looks relatively inoffensive to the average UK citizen, but actually it does a huge amount of damage. And I mean, that's just one example. I mean, when you look at trade unions, actually, it's really interesting. There's a little bit of research, not as much as I'd like to see, but the ITUC have done quite a bit of research on things like trade union, how trade unions operate in countries under different voting systems. And in a nutshell, I mean, I haven't got the slide to hand actually, which is really unhelpful, but in a nutshell, basically the most frequent violation of workers' rights happened in countries that use majoritarian voting systems. The least violations of workers' rights happened in the countries that use like some form of proportional representation. And it really was a very clear correlation. There's also been other research done in, there's a fair bit of research in New Zealand, because they've changed their voting system recently. And in New Zealand, they look at the mentions of trade union mentions in manifesto promises, and what happened when they introduced PR, and the mentions of trade unions in the manifesto of both the New Zealand Labour Party and the New Zealand National Party went up at the moment they introduced PR, because actually they realised, you know, the parties realised that they needed the trade unions, you know, if they actually had to win a vote in a fairer system. So it is about, I mean, it's all very interconnected, and we don't always think about how these things are interconnected, and we don't always think about how they have a knock-on effect. Like, I mean, if we had stronger trade unions in this country, actually, we probably would find ourselves in a situation where the government didn't have the same sort of, you know, because actually if we had stronger trade unions, they could bargain for a better system. You know, it's like it's all interconnected, and it's all about you know, whilst we may not be, you know, sort of, we might not be talking about Tolpuddle martyrs or, you know, Peterloo, but we're still fighting for that democracy. And actually that erosion of our democracy is still happening, and the, you know, the dire consequences on the general public are very much, you know, swinging austerity is still hurting all of us, and that's happening because, you know, we have a system that allows it.
And do you think that this argument is starting to be understood by the trade unions, that there's a direct correlation between the voting system and you know, levels of trade union engagement?
I think there's always been those in the trade union that have known that that's the case. I think the difficulty with trade unions is they're in a situation where they have to be bread and butter issues, you know, because as Nadia said, you know, membership is low and you know, and they're restricted, so they are tied to bread and butter issues because that's what, you know, workers want to talk about. However, the shift in the membership, the Labour Party membership, has had a knock-on effect, and the fact that PR is being spoken about more and more is having an effect on the trade unions. And that is, you know, we're starting to, whereas 2 years ago we'd have a conversation and they'd go, yeah, PR, you know, it's a techie issue, you know, or you might get someone who was a bit keen. Now you mention PR and like whatever the opinion of the person you're talking to, they know exactly what you're talking about. You know, it's that kind of, the conversation is definitely shifting.
Well, and we've got 2 women now leading the 2 largest trade unions, so maybe this should also give us some hope. June, did you have a question for one of Nadia or Caroline?
It was Caroline, really. Yeah, Unison is the biggest trade union in the country. And I know what you're saying about the bread and butter issues, but there's a lot of major issues that we are making a real difference to low paid workers. So that must be recognised. Yes, restrictions are in place through the past governments and what they've done since the 80s on over. So we must recognise the trade unions are still strong and fighting that for, you know, standard more so over the last 2 years over COVID, where, you know, as Unison have done a great big support for PPE for those working on, whether it was in the health service or in the private sector mainly. So, you know, that has to be taken into, that's been done through trade unions because it's been private sector and other areas have not had the PPE in, which has threatened lives. And people are working for that. And I understand where you're going, but as you're saying, all these legislations are changed. And naturally, before you can do a ballot or a strike action, you have to have 50% of your union members to be able to strike. And that's where unions have been castrated over, more so in the 2020 situation, where in the previous, in the 80s, you know, activists could speak openly and freely and a lot more. But it's sadly that them voices are being taken away, but that won't stop trade unionist members. But yeah, I think, yes, a lot more research needs to be in that. And as you said, media does give a different swing to what trade unions is all about. But yeah.
Yeah, what I would say is I'm really sorry if I sounded like I was bashing trade unions. I'm 1000% trade unionist myself.
We've got a voice.
Yeah, I know, and I recognise how hard the trade unions are fighting. I'd just like them to have a bit more power to do a bit more.
Yeah,
you know,
it's also, you know, you've got lots of different workplaces that won't even recognise a trade union, and that's where the difficulties start. I mean, I don't know if Pam, do you want to say anything to that?
We've got 2 Pamelas.
Yeah, hello, it's me. Yeah, it's I'm backing June up completely. I work in education, in the education sector, and like June have said, it's been very, very difficult since COVID, and even now, we're not through this at any point. You know, we've still got people who are very confused by the information that they're given. We've still got children that are still, you know, having COVID symptoms. We've still got a lot of staff off. Yeah, so the unions are still really completely fighting 100% for the workforce, and certainly June and I complement the Middlesbrough branch as much as we possibly can, yes.
Well, we're really pleased to have active trade unionists here, actually, because there was some discussion after the last Labour Party conference that we hadn't got PR because of the unions. And the position that the campaign took was that actually, given COVID in particular, it was totally unreasonable to expect Unison to be focusing on anything other than COVID-related issues, which is what it did at its conference last year, which is why it didn't talk about PR. But I think we are optimistic that you know, the unions are also starting to make these linkages between, you know, all the stuff they're up against with the government and the 80-seat majority that the Tories have. Nadia, do you have a sense? I mean, I don't know, which union are you in, Nadia? Are you GMB?
Yeah, I've always been GMB.
Well, and so your lot's a little lost to us, I'm afraid. They've got policy against electoral reform.
Yeah, I know.
Anything you can do about it?
I've been lobbying my union on a fair number of issues, particularly a Green New Deal, and I will also speak to them about electoral reform. I'm not sure how much difference that will make, but I think what will make a difference is lots of GMB members raising it in their branches. So, like, if there are GMB members here, then I'd encourage you to do that, because unions tend to listen to their memberships, and I think, yeah, with any trade union, I think any leadership of anything, to be honest, I think can be sort of kind of play things on the safe side and often kind of underestimate their membership perhaps, and think that people are only interested in a narrow set of issues, and actually I think that people can care about multiple things at once.
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's the walk and chew gum. Emma, up there from Eastbourne, now on the left-hand side of my screen. Did you have a question for Nadia or Caroline?
No, I was just going to say kind of about the unison support. So, I mean, I think the feedback that I got from other branches that I've spoken to was when the decision was made at conference last time that they weren't going to support it, everybody kind of came back and was a little bit like, but we didn't know they were going to make that decision, and nobody had really asked. And there was a feeling that if we'd shouted about it before, the decision that was made wouldn't have been made. So, I mean, we've been in touch with a number of branches who have all put forward your motion to conference this year. And actually, I mean, we've been talking today about trying to organise a fringe meeting and increase support for that motion. I think there's about 8 or 10 branches across the country that have actually submitted it as their main motion for conference this year. So, I mean, we're hoping to get a little bit more traction with it this time. But yeah, I mean, we were all kind of, everybody came to the branch meeting following it. It was just like, how did that happen? We didn't know that was going to be where they went. And it was just, I think, a lack of kind of pre-warning was part of the problem. And I think it's galvanized people a little bit as well, which has helped.
You're making Caroline's evening, because there's nothing Caroline likes more than women who support electoral reform and are in trade unions. Caroline,
and are switched on to exactly what's going on with the campaign. We've got 13 motions that have been composited, I think, into 4 different, because they're all slightly different. So they're all 13 versions of our motion, but some have got slightly different titles or one word different.
Yeah,
so
ours was. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, they're into 4 different groupings. So we now need to get one of them prioritised. Have you been talking to Stephen Smiley by any chance?
That's where, yeah. So he emailed us today. Yeah. So yes, we've just started that conversation.
Fabulous, because I think we probably will have I think there'll be more conversations about this and how we get one prioritised. But it's essentially, it's really good news. And what I would say about Unison in their defence is they didn't vote down the motion at Labour Party conference. They abstained, which was a big move for a union that had no policy. So, you know, it's a very friendly move that happened. So that's good. And nobody spoke against. And you know, we're hopeful that. But we just now need, as Unison, we need a coordinated effort. So if anybody is a Unison member on this call, watch out for your emails. And, you know, if you know your branch is putting forward a motion, then get in touch. And Emma, I'm sure we'll be in touch over the coming weeks anyway. So.
Yes, I mean, I'm the treasurer, and we've basically just agreed to co-fund with anybody else that wants to kick in that fringe meeting and you know, help out a bit.
That's absolutely brilliant. Vicky, you've got your yellow hand up.
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to ask Nadia, because obviously the GMB was very disappointing, and the person who spoke at the conference, it was all the tired old arguments. But I wanted to ask, how are people voted within the union itself? When you have your own elections, is that always first past the post?
I'm not actually sure, is the honest answer.
Okay.
Because I haven't really been involved in elections within the union. I've more just been involved in my workplace, kind of in GMBU stuff. But I do remember the kind of arguments at conference, and I've got to say that I've never heard a convincing argument in favour of first past the post, including at conference. I also had a question actually for Caroline and Emma / everyone. Where are the other unions at on this? Kind of, I get the impression that Unison is the most friendly, and then Unite of the big unions, GMB is obviously the most against. But then what about the smaller unions? Like where does CWU sit?
Caroline.
So Unite actually now have policy that is opposed to first past the post. It's not quite in favour of PR, but it's opposed to first past the post, and they're going to put an education programme in place to educate about proportional representation. So it's great. And Sharon Graham came out strongly in favour of PR after conference as well, which after their conference, which is cracking. So and that was annoyingly a month after Labour Party conference, but actually if they hadn't seen the membership go over, then maybe they wouldn't have been so pro at their conference. So then you've got the smaller unions, ASLEF, Bakers Union, but they've now disaffiliated, TSSA, Musicians Union, FBU have got policy in favour. Who am I missing? Who have I forgotten?
So the NUM doesn't have policy.
Yeah, no,
and USDOR are against. So
USDOR
basically, all the small
GMB are really close. So
yeah, all the smaller unions, which to some extent you might also classify as being maybe more on the left, are pro.
Yeah, and CWU abstained at conference, have no policy, but they've got motions going to their conference.
You've got Monica desperately trying to get
Don't
in
worry,
there.
I've spotted
Right, we'll get her a
Monica.
chance,
I've
don't worry.
spotted Monica's yellow hand and her finger. Fire away, Monica. But now you've got to unmute yourself. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how many hands you wave, Monica, if you're not on mute. Go on, we're willing you on.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yay.
Yeah, I was trying to say, because you got the smaller unions, UKU, Universities and Colleges Union. I would have thought there must be some people there. It's the
Not
university.
affiliated though. They're not affiliated.
To what?
To the Labour Party.
So the Labour
None of
Party,
the education unions are affiliated to the Labour Party.
Well, it was. I mean, the thing is that I'm not a member anymore because I've retired. Now, of course, possibly if I'd continue to pay my dues, I don't know. That was my question.
Yeah, then I mean, unaffiliated unions are still helpful, but they don't get any sway on the Labour Party.
They're unaffiliated to the Labour Party.
They're
No, but
unaffiliated
it's still
to
a
the Labour
union.
Party. Yeah, but they can't shift Labour Party policy. So, I mean, it's helpful to have unaffiliated unions in favour, and it definitely, you know, if you wanted to write to them and ask them what their policy is, that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're not going to shift anything at conference, unfortunately. So they're not going to shift Labour Party policy. But they could be part of the wider, you know, because
yes. I mean, I don't know. As I said, I've retired, and all the younger, the new people are much younger. So I don't have old contacts. So anyway, yes.
The way that the party functions is you have a vote at conference, and 50% of the vote is made up by the constituency Labour parties, which obviously we won resoundingly, and the other 50% comes from the 12 affiliated unions. Is it 12 or is it 11?
I think we're 11 now because the Baker's disaffiliated.
Yeah, I think we're 11 now, and those votes are weighted relative to the size of the union, which is why it's possible for us to get 4 or 5 unions voting for PR but still lose. But if we can persuade over the next few months some combination of the CWU, the Communication Workers Union, and or Unison and or Unite, then we'll win. Simple as that.
Yeah, can I do my other bit, which was the original hand up? So I just butted in with a. I wanted to actually refer to the fact that this is a fringe meeting, isn't it, to the Labour conference, to the Women's Conference, sorry, the Labour Women's Conference. And one of the reasons I decided to come here is because there's just been this very interesting development. And Laura, you asked for the wider picture. This is very far away. It's Chile. the other end of the world, where they've just elected a women's government, basically. So the whole country is governed by 14 out of 24. It's what is not the proportion of cabinet ministers. Yes, it's cabinet ministers are women, and they are currently discussing the constitution and how it's going to be changed, and they're going to it's going to be very heavy on women's equality, and particularly in areas that are sort of slightly new regarding women's needs, a much more broader consideration of women's needs as being their rights. And since, you know, we are also discussing the issues for a renewal of well, we don't have a constitution, but anyway, we do have constitutional-like declarations. And I thought that I'd bring in something that's also come from the feminist movement, which is the concept of constitutional gender parity. And I just think that this would be a great term for the Labour Party to adopt.
Constitutional gender parity.
Yes.
Well, I know there is a connection, which in fact I wanted to ask Caroline about, and I'm sure others might know. I know that Mary is at the bottom of my screen, right-hand side, hiding. But there are connections, aren't there, Caroline, between voting systems and the representation of women?
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there is a correlation with better representation, and actually it's quite interesting when you even look at like UK devolved assemblies, because you've got a situation where Wales, where they use PR for their members of the Senate, they've got 43% of Senate members are women versus 28% of MPs. And then when you look at Scotland and you look at the same comparison, you've got 43% of women in Holyrood versus 28% of MPs in Westminster. So wow. it does, you know, I mean, that's just one example of the striking difference. And there was research that suggested that all countries that used PR had a higher number of women in government, but there was a vote, I can't remember, I want to say Malta or something skewed it, but something changed. So I can't say 100% anymore, but it you know, the stats are pretty compelling on it.
Was this the Harvard research that was fairly recent that said basically of majority voting systems, so ones like ours, about 1 in 10 were women compared with 1 in 5 with proportional systems?
I think Monica's itching to answer that one.
Yes. No, there's long been an established parity concept, which was originally exclusively about women, and then it evolved into being accompanied by the gender quota, which this is going back to the 90s, where already lots of electoral systems were changed, and all parties were legally obliged to field parity, and the concept of parity, not just concept, but the actuality was you had to have a minimum of 60%, 60-40 relationship between the sexes. You had to have something within that range. You could not have more than 60% of any gender in your candidate list and in Parliament. And they actually made it law so that Parliament was also, it had to fall between that bracket, 40-60. So that's very high.
Yeah, and you can see,
so it's fair. Yeah,
I mean, I guess it's that not very scientifically, but it sort of feels to me like it stands to reason that a system which by its very nature promotes greater levels of cross-party collaboration and starts to change the way that politics feel, and even in most European countries, the way that politicians sit, will over time engender a sort of politics that maybe more women would also want to be part of. You know, when you look at the European Parliament, or I mean, the Parliament in Italy where I live is hardly quiet, but it is at least circular. You know, you're not just got these two opposing sides kind of yelling at each other all the time. Sarah, I think you've got your hand up, and then Pamela?
Well, I mean, it's very clear that PR is much easier to increase the number of women in Parliament, because it's much easier to do it than it was in the UK, which is when I worked with Claire Short and Jo Richardson on the quota system years ago. And actually, the real problem with PR is not a panacea. If you don't have population in favour of increasing the number of women and the diversity of women, which is also incredibly important, then it won't happen. But if you have, then, you know, there are plenty of examples of Europe, which I've worked on over years. I mean, I remember I think it was Norway, when they had, you have a party list system, and the party list system is what's really important, who's at the top of the list and who's at the bottom. And actually the Norwegians actually crossed out all the male members at the top of the list and just voted for women, and it was incredibly effective in actually increasing the number of women in Parliament. So actually you are left with a list system, and it's very important how the list system is composed for whether you get more members of Parliament. But I mean, it's absolutely clear that it is much easier than it is with our system, where you've got one member, one seat, and you have the local population. The CLP has the control of who becomes the candidate, and it's very difficult to actually get a widespread gender, race, etc. across, which means it's much more challenging in a one-party, in the kind of system we've got, than it is in other countries. So once you've got the will, then actually having a PR system makes it much easier to do. That's all.
Yes, what an advert that Scandinavian countries always are. When you see a picture of the Finnish government and you think, blimey, can you imagine us having a government here of 5 women, 4 of whom are under the age of 35? I mean, it just feels to me to be, and it feels like another planet, and yet, you know, you can fly there in an hour and a half. Nadia, do you have any reflections on how you think it would change?
You have to remember we have improved. I mean, you know, when I started working on this, we were 6% of women in Parliament, 6% before we had the quotas. You have to remember we've come an enormously long way, despite the fact that the system doesn't help us. It makes
it's true. That's very true. Nadia, I mean, you're a relatively recent addition to Parliament. Do you think many MPs think about what PR would do for politics and how politics would be, and what that could mean in terms of the way that people cooperate or maybe don't? Or is that part of the discussion that people would have in the PLP, or is it just a blimey, I'll lose my seat?
Yeah, I think it is a lot of that. And I think when people get to Westminster, people can become quite cynical and can think about elections and politics in a very kind of electoral way and in quite a cynical way. I also think that because there's so much on your plate as an MP, that often people overlook PR and they don't see it as an issue that's fundamental and see it more as a kind of fringe or niche interest, rather than something that would be the first step in deepening and extending our democracy. I think among MPs as well, there's a lot of concern about losing a constituency link, but of course there are lots of ways to do PR that don't mean that you lose a constituency link. I'd say that a surprising number of MPs actually are instinctively pro-PR, because I think it does instinctively seem like the right thing to do to have a fairer voting system. I'd say on kind of representation of women, I mean, obviously there is a lot of research that shows that voting systems like ours have women are underrepresented in them, and in proportional representation type systems we're better represented. I'd also say that there are obviously limits to representation and representation politics, like this kind of idea of visibility politics. So we had Thatcher, Theresa May, Priti Patel, all women leaders. We saw what Thatcher did for women. We saw Theresa May preside over austerity and huge cuts to domestic and sexual violence services. Priti Patel, a woman of colour, the most senior female politician in the UK, is responsible for enacting the hostile environment. But I do think, nevertheless, that obviously representation is important, and I'm glad that the Labour Party has over 50% of women MPs. We're yet to have any trans MPs, though, including trans women. And the other thing that I'd say about PR is that I think because it creates space for a wider range of ideas, I'd hope that that would mean that things that are currently seen as marginal, unfairly, because they're things that disproportionately affect women, like maternal health. I mean, there are so many examples. I'd hope that in a more proportional system that those would get more of a hearing.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Other Pamela, who's now in my left. I love the way people bob around the screen. You're now in the left-hand corner as well.
I just wanted to raise the links really with gender and being a woman, and I don't think you can avoid those issues once one starts talking about quotas and increasing the representation of women. We are in that sort of position of debating what's a woman, and I also don't think you can avoid being very clear about when you're talking about sex and when you're talking about gender, that they're often used interchangeably, and I don't think they're interchangeable. But I don't want to say much more than that, because it's another issue, and it's a big and complicated issue, but I don't think one can avoid it. Personally, I'm not in favour, for example, of the changes in Scotland, what I think of the changes in Scotland, because I think it won't allow you to keep any proper data where there is discrimination about women. You need to know for the whole of their lives, not for a couple of years. So all I'm saying, I think, is that the two things have to be recognised at the same time. I haven't particularly got a position because I think it is complicated, but I think there are things about for me, the fact that women have children and have to look after their children is at the root of a great deal of the discrimination, and that somehow has to be taken into account. And that's not to say that trans women can't have positions in Parliament or be part of PR, but it does mean that I do want a better definition of, or not even a definition. I think I want more recognition of the fact that it's a tricky issue, and it's not just one side or the other.
Well, I think it is a very big issue that you've touched on. There's probably quite a lot I would want to say about it, but I might see whether Caroline or Nadia do. Caroline?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably we are here to talk about proportional representation. So talking about, sort of wider issues that, when you're talking about quotas and gender recognition. I mean, what I would say, you mentioned women in childcare in terms of statistics. I would say that trans women can also be parents. So I think, there's a lot of data gets muddied, and once these debates start, an awful lot of data gets muddied. I mean, trans women are women, and they have a right to, be recognised as women. And, and I do think it is a bigger issue, and it's probably not one for this evening. But I mean, in terms of gathering data and in terms of supporting women who have families, that is really, really important. And there are better ways to gather data. And I think maybe the start point is looking at how we gather that data, how we use that data, how we support people, because it's fundamentally incredibly important. If you want more women in Parliament, you support women with, the issues that they require support with, and it starts with the voting system. You improve the voting system, you improve the numbers of women who will sit in Parliament, and then you look at, and also if you get more women in Parliament, then more women in Parliament are going to talk about how to support more women in Parliament. You know, it kind of goes without saying. It's like this whole thing where you get a room full of men who make decisions about us without us being present. You know, so yeah.
Nadia?
I would completely echo everything that Caroline said, and I don't have much more to add to that. I think it's also important to recognise trans men in this discussion. Trans men are people who usually would have wombs and would be able to be pregnant with a child. They don't consider themselves to be women, but under a kind of sex-based definition would be, and that erases their identity. And we should also be thinking about them as childbearing people. I think, just following on from what Caroline said about representation, again, I think this is really important, particularly with regards to trans women. We don't have a single trans woman MP, or not openly, and I'm not saying that it would be a silver bullet if we did, because we've seen that representation for other people hasn't been the silver bullet. I've mentioned Priti Patel, Theresa May, Thatcher, there are many others. But I think if we did have just one trans person who was a member of Parliament, maybe we wouldn't be in a position where trans people were being systematically oppressed and marginalised by our government. Maybe we wouldn't be in a position where 1 in 3 employers openly admit that they wouldn't hire a trans person, or that trans people are waiting more than 2 years for basic healthcare, or that trans men are missing out on cervical screening.
We might also have a politics which was generally bolder, because I think the problem with the system that we currently have is that we all know, and I think we can see as if we take other issues, you know, we began by talking about our solidarity with the women in Ukraine. I mean, I don't want to sort of take a position on NATO. None of us are going to apologise for Putin, and if you do, you'll be off the call pretty quickly. But you know, there's a big discussion to have about our military industrial complex. There's a big discussion to be had about the role of NATO, the role of the United Nations. We're not really having that discussion. In my view, we're not having that discussion because somebody much higher up the food chain than me has decided that we win the next election by appealing to a small number of switch voters in a small number of marginal seats who think about the world in a particular way. Now, I happen to think that that's an over-characterization anyway. In the so-called Red Wall, you'll find all sorts of views about all sorts of things, from transgender rights through to membership of NATO, through to taxation. But I think the problem with the system that we've got is it doesn't allow politicians to take what might be considered brave or challenging stances on issues, because they're thinking about that switch voter in that marginal seat. And we've done the profile, and that's a home-owning 63-year-old who has a car, you know, and it just cuts out so much of the richness of the rest of the country, and it diminishes our politics. I mean, if you look at the 5 women in Finland, one of them represents a Finnish language group, and they can, because the system enables that. I mean, otherwise there would be a whole linguistic minority which would never be in government if they had our system, because you'd never win, would you, if you were the Welsh-speaking minority party? You'd cat in hell's chance. So I think there's also something about the way that our politics and the braveness and courage of politicians to deal with issues like trans rights is diminished, because our system doesn't actually encourage you to take them on, because that's not what you need to talk about if you want to get elected. Nadia, do you?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I just wanted to clarify that I don't think that when I said even just one trans MP, I don't think that the numbers of trans MPs should be limited to just the one, obviously. But I agree with what you say, Laura, about first past the post, generally kind of diminishing people's power while giving disproportionate power to people in marginal seats. And it kind of allows politicians to cater to this lowest common denominator politics. It's like politicians imagine that somebody in an imagined place in the Red Wall will have an imagined view about a certain issue, whether it's policing or trans rights or military spend, and then we'll cater. Shit, sorry. Knocked over my metal water bottle, frightened me. And then we'll cater their policy to that.
That's our MPs, they're all hooligans, you know, chucking stuff around the living room. I can see we've got June and Monica. Is there anyone else though before wants to ask a question, want to know something about the campaign? Now's your chance to quiz Nadia about her water bottle. June, in that case, did you?
Yeah, I think, you know, Nadia, you were saying about, you know, politicians of the opposite side. I think we must also recognise our fantastic lady politicians over the years from the Labour Party, such as we had a fantastic one, Mo Mowlam, and we've got to recognise our past Labour strong women. You know, considering just a few years ago, we talked about our suffragettes, which we must never forget that, and how strong they were, no matter which party they come from. But also, if we're talking about women in general, no matter what you identify as that, we must also how it affects people's careers, who then, because of no fault of their own, you know, are carers, whether carers for children or somebody with mental health or with learning disability or whatever, elderly. You know, people give up their career. And they think because people are carers and women that they've got no thought or no rights or no privacies or any sort of a human voice. So we've got to be very conscious of, no matter who or how we identify as a woman, we've got to take in such a wide spectrum of that. And, you know, if I think back when I first started my working life in the 80s in the class 28 and 29, you know, people, even maybe before you were born, Nadia, if you identified with a gender group, you weren't allowed in any sort of work. That's how big changes have been. And it seems a long, long time ago now, but I think we've not to forget that, because I talk to young people now and they don't even know about it. You know, so much is easy to be talked about now, where even 40 years ago it was a shh, don't let anybody know. So that was just my little point anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, June. I'm going to ask Lynn now, who's got a hand up. Hi, Lynn.
Hi. Yes, I was a women's officer for LCR until just recently, and now Abby Jones, who's on the call, has taken over. So I put up on the chat the statistics for women's representation in different parliaments with the kind of system that they have, and that's in the chat if you're interested in looking. But I just want to mention the National Policy Forum, because the National Policy Forum is being revived and it's going to have elections in the summer for representatives. And the National Policy Forum feeds into the manifesto, the Clause 5 meeting, and it has a lot of power in that meeting. So what we want really is for people to stand for the National Policy Forum. People who support PR, get onto the National Policy Forum. I haven't got the dates yet for the nominations, but it's coming up soon, because it's going to be the same time as the NEC that we elect our representatives. And the more pro-PR people we can get, the better it will be for our cause. Thank you.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Absolutely right, Lynn. And we're going to be launching a PR pledge, which we're going to try to popularise amongst as many candidates as possible for NEC and MPF positions. You've moved. There you are. Monica and Sarah, if you don't mind, I might just ask Abby to say something, as she hasn't yet, and we've got about 5 minutes left. So
thanks. Just a really quick plug from me. Thanks, Lynn, for mentioning that handover as a great introduction. I am the new women's officer at the Labour campaign for electoral reform. I'm also trying to, as the youngest member, but technically losing my definition of young when I turn 30 in 2 days. by Labour standards. I'm trying to put together a sort of youth working group to sort of work alongside the Labour campaign for electoral reform to really target student groups and things like that. And we're starting to gather some names, but all of those names are men, young men, and all brilliant, but we would really love to get some women in the mix. So if you know any youngish women who would be interested in this, that we could pull into our working group, that you can be from anywhere, because we'll probably be meeting on Zoom. So do just shoot me up a message, or I'll drop my email in the chat as well, in case you or someone you know might want to join our efforts. Thanks.
Brilliant, good plug. I'm conscious of the fact that we've now got 4 minutes. I'm just going to ask Mary to say hello, and then I'll maybe ask Caroline and Nadia to say whatever they feel like after this wide-ranging and free-flowing conversation. Mary, let us see you. We can't see you.
Yes, that's good.
Yay! Oh, you're sitting in a cupboard like John Curtis.
Yes, it's a coffin. What I wanted to say was something about, I've been around for a long time, as everybody knows. And when we first started going with electoral reform, we realised that women had to have something to say about electoral reform. It wasn't to be left for men. And we called ourselves the New Suffragettes. And the reason we called ourselves the New Suffragettes is that we believed that it wasn't just important to have the franchise, but we need to have everybody to have a franchise, not just the people who are voting in marginal seats, which is the point that you made, Laura, but also that we need to change the culture of politics, which I went on an international Zoom recently about war and women, and it was very clear that there was a different culture, a consensus-seeking culture, maybe the opposite of what Laura said, but not to contradict her, in that we needed to nuance our discussion. We need to find consensus, we find agreement, and we look for agreement rather than look for difference, dichotomy, separation. And especially when we're dealing with diversity, I think women have more of a chance to have a say. So I just want to say, change your political culture, enfranchise people in the Southwest where I'm living, not just Bristol, but everybody, because we've got too many Tories down here.
Yes, well, and it's amazing the work you've done in the Southwest. I think it's the second, I'd like to say this, after Yorkshire, I think it's the second highest number of motions that we've passed, which is absolutely brilliant. Nadia, do you have any kind of final thoughts, questions, observations? Are you going to volunteer to be an honorary something in the network of young people that Abby's setting up? Because I think you might be the only other person on here that qualifies.
I'm very happy to be an honorary something, as long as that could be like my exact title. Honorary.
There you are, Abby. You've just recruited live your first honorary young
Brilliant
MP.
We now have as many women as we do people called Janes. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm really excited to have Abby as part of the team as well. I think that you're going to do great things, and it's just really important to have young people, and especially young women, because I think too often, and Mary was alluding to this, PR has been something that has been considered to be like an intellectual conversation to be had between men, rather than actually a conversation that is very fundamental to our democracy and our society. So I just wanted to end really by saying thank you for all of the work that you've been doing, Laura, and the whole team, and congratulations for all of your work that has profiled PR and almost won it within the Labour Party. I'm really confident that we can win it, and that we can win that a policy for that fairer, more proportional voting system that we need. And of course, that's just the beginning, and it goes hand in hand with other democratic demands like scrapping all the anti-union laws, like a democratic Green New Deal that gives people power in their communities. So yeah, final words, just thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us, because we know you're incredibly busy, and it means a great deal to us to have the support of MPs. And although we do want a proportional system, we hope that your particular seat is very, very safe for a very long time. Caroline, do you want to give us a final, what are we supposed to be doing? What's our homework?
So actions to take away. Can I also add to Nadia's thanks? There's so many familiar faces on this call, and there's so many people who've done so much for the campaign already. So thank you for everything you're doing. If you'd like to do a bit more, and we'd like you to, there's a few things you can do. You can invite a speaker to your CLP or your trade union branch if you're a trade unionist. There's details of how to do that on the website. I'm sure we can get a link to that website in the chat. If you're a union member, talk to us about putting forward a motion. Drop us an email at the Labour for a New Democracy email address. Again, we'll stick that in the chat before the end of the call, and you can save the chat if you want to. Put a motion to your CLP. We're probably going to be looking for CLPs to send conference motions as well in due course, although we'll get in touch with you about that nearer the time. Delegations, if you're a trade unionist, see if you can be a delegate to your trade union conference, especially if you're Unison or CWU. It's probably a little bit late for CWU now, but badger your delegates as well. You know, if you know who is in your delegation. GMB have possibly got a motion going as well. So, and us may have one if it makes their standing orders. But get in touch with us and ask, because we can tell you exactly where motions are going to be once they're, you know, sort of standing orders committee have finalised what their conferences are going to look like. And if you're standing for election in May, talk to us about holding up a pledge card and tweeting out a pledge to say you support PR. But mostly just make sure you should all be signed up for the campaign because you're all here. But, you know, if for any reason you've managed to sneak on this call without signing up for the campaign, sign up to our website to hear more, get our emails and hear what we're up to, and we will send out all these instructions. So thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Caroline. I'm very pleased to see in the chat we've got active recruiting going on. So Abby's email is there for anyone who has a young, slightly younger friend, sister, daughter, next door neighbour. Anyone who wants campaign info, hopefully you know how to find us. We will hopefully see many of you physically slightly later on this year at Labour Party conference, but there's going to be more events between now and then. And we are hoping to, we had a really, I don't know if any of you came to the discussion with Andy Burnham that we had a couple of weeks ago. Thanks to Mary and Abby in particular, who between them helped us get him. But we're hoping to have some more, including maybe some senior women from the trade union movement, which would be really brilliant. And I think if we do manage to get a senior woman from the trade union movement, we would like as many women as possible to be at the meeting. So we will let you know. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope those of you who are going to the rest of the Labour Party conference will enjoy it. It's always great to have a discussion with the sisters. Travel safely back to your living room, bedroom, kitchen, wherever it is you're now travelling to. And thanks from all of the team at Labour for New Democracy for coming along. And yeah, stay safe. Thanks a lot. Bye. Bye.
Bye.